The smirk on my brother-in-law's face told me everything before he even spoke. "Nice of you to join us, Sarah," Brandon said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "We were just placing bets on whether that ancient Toyota of yours would actually make it up the driveway this time." The laughter that erupted around the elegantly set dining table felt like daggers to my chest. My hand instinctively tightened around the manila envelope in my purse, the weight of its contents suddenly feeling much heavier than mere paper. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I stood frozen in the doorway of the sprawling Victorian home I once loved so dearly, the home my grandmother had left to all of us, though somehow only my sister's family now occupied it. The smell of roast beef and expensive wine hung in the air as 6 pairs of eyes studied me, some amused, some pitying, none kind. "At least she made it in time for dinner," my sister Vanessa said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, though fashionably late as usual. I forced myself to step fully into the dining room, my sensible second-hand dress suddenly feeling inadequate among their designer outfits. "Traffic was bad on Maple Street," I said, which wasn't a lie. I'd actually circled the block twice, practicing what I would say, how I would handle this moment. "Should have left earlier," my brother-in-law quipped, raising his wine glass. "Or invested in a car made this century." More laughter rippled around the table where Vanessa, Brandon, their teenage children Aiden and Zoe, and Brandon's parents sat enjoying what had once been my family's traditional Sunday dinner. "Come sit, Sarah." Vanessa gestured to the empty chair wedged in the corner, clearly added as an afterthought. Brandon opened a lovely Cabernet. I slipped into the chair, setting my purse carefully on the floor beside me, making sure the envelope remained hidden but accessible. Vanessa's housekeeper, Maria, appeared silently with an extra place setting and a glass of water, no wine offered to me. "How's the apartment hunting going?" Brandon's father, Richard, asked with feigned interest. He was a retired real estate developer who had always treated my presence like an unfortunate business obligation. "Actually," I began, only to be interrupted by my nephew. "Mom says you're having trouble finding anything decent in your price range," Aiden said, scrolling through his phone without looking up. At 16, he had already mastered his father's dismissive tone. "That's not—" I tried again. "It's such a tough market right now," Vanessa interjected with a sympathetic cluck that felt anything but genuine. "Especially when you're on a teacher's salary." I bit back the response that formed instantly on my tongue. 5 years as a middle school English teacher had taught me patience, if nothing else. 5 years of listening to my sister and her husband explain how they'd temporarily moved into Grandma Rose's house to maintain it properly after her passing. The same 5 years they'd been telling me that they'd get around to discussing my portion of the inheritance. "Brandon, tell everyone about the renovation plans," Vanessa prompted, clearly eager to change the subject. "We've finally decided on the contractor for the East Wing expansion." My stomach tightened. This was the first I'd heard of any expansion plans for the house that, according to Grandma Rose's will, belonged equally to Vanessa and me. Brandon launched into an elaborate description of their plans to add a home theater and wine cellar where Grandma's garden room had been. The room where she'd taught me to identify every flower in her prized collection, where she'd told me stories of our family's history as we pressed blossoms between the pages of heavy books. "Of course, we'll need to take down that ridiculous old greenhouse," Brandon continued, cutting into his roast beef. "The one with all the leaks. The greenhouse where I'd spent countless afternoons with Grandma. The greenhouse that was specifically mentioned in her will as something to be preserved." "Sarah, you're not eating." Vanessa's voice cut through my thoughts. "Maria made your favorite, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding. It had been my favorite when we were children, before everything changed." before Vanessa married Brandon Wellington and suddenly decided our modest upbringing was something to be erased rather than cherished. It looks delicious, I managed, picking up my fork. Food tasted like ash in my mouth as Brandon continued outlining how they planned to modernize every last remnant of Grandma Rose's home. Oh, and the best part, Brandon said, gesturing with his fork. We're finally going to pave over that ridiculous English garden in the back for a proper pool and entertainment deck. No more of those old-fashioned flowers dropping petals everywhere. I set my fork down with a clink that somehow silenced the entire table. 5 years of patience suddenly evaporated like morning dew under a scorching sun. The English garden stays, I said quietly. Brandon laughed, looking around the table as if to gather support for how ridiculous I was being. Sarah, be reasonable. This isn't 1950. Nobody wants an overgrown garden full of roses and whatever other weeds your grandmother insisted on growing. Those weeds include several rare heritage rose varieties that Grandma cultivated for decades, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, and they stay. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Vanessa sighed dramatically. Sarah, we've been over this. Brandon and I are living here. We make the decisions about the property. Living here doesn't make it yours, I said. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Brandon's parents exchanged glances. The teenagers finally looked up from their phones, sensing drama. Let's not do this now, Vanessa said with forced cheerfulness. We have guests. When would you suggest we do it then? I asked. 5 years ago? When Grandma died and left the house to both of us? 4 years ago, when you promised we'd discuss it after the holidays? 3 years ago, when you said you needed more time? 2 years ago, when you stopped answering my calls about it? Or last year, when you told me to stop being so money-hungry for asking about my inheritance? Brandon's face hardened. Now listen here. No, you listen, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out the manila envelope. For 5 years I've listened. I've been patient. I've waited for you both to do the right thing. The room fell silent as I placed the envelope on the table. What's that supposed to be? Brandon scoffed. It's an eviction notice, I said. Simply. Vanessa laughed nervously. Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. You can't evict us from our own home. I slid the envelope toward her. It's not your home. It never was. It's our home. Jointly owned according to Grandma Rose's will. A will that specifically stated that if one party wished to live in the house, they must compensate the other party, fairly for their half. Brandon's face began to redden. We've let you visit whenever you want. We've included you in family dinners. After moving all my belongings to the attic without my permission, I cut in. After converting my bedroom into your home gym. After repeatedly postponing any discussion of buying out my half of the property. I tapped the envelope. Inside, you'll find the eviction notice, along with documentation of the 17 emails, 24 text messages, and 9 certified letters I've sent over the past 5 years requesting resolution to our joint ownership situation. Vanessa stared at me, her face draining of color. You wouldn't dare. I already have, I replied. You have 30 days to either purchase my half of the property at fair market value or vacate so it can be sold and the proceeds divided equally. Brandon slammed his fist on the table, causing the crystal glasses to rattle. This is preposterous. Where would we even get that kind of money on such short notice? Perhaps from the contractor you've already hired for the renovation, I suggested, or from the pool company you've engaged, or maybe from whatever fund you were planning to use to modernize Grandma's home without my consent or knowledge. Richard Wellington cleared his throat. Brandon, is what she's saying true? You don't actually own this property outright? The look of panic that flashed across Brandon's face was answer enough. He had clearly led his parents to believe that the house was solely in his and Vanessa's names. Of course we own it, Vanessa jumped in. Sarah's just being difficult because her life hasn't turned out the way she wanted. She's always been jealous of what Brandon and I have built. What you've built? I echoed in disbelief. You've built nothing. You moved into a house our grandmother spent a lifetime creating and have been systematically destroying everything that made it special. That's not fair, Vanessa protested, her voice rising. We've improved this place, made it modern, made it worth something. Worth something? I repeated, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. It was always worth something, Vanessa. To Grandma, to me. Just not in dollars and cents. Brandon's mother, Eleanor, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Sarah, surely there's room for compromise here. Families shouldn't fight like this over property. I turned to her with a sad smile. Mrs. Wellington, I've been trying to compromise for 5 years. I never wanted to live here. I have my own life, my own dreams. All I wanted was for Vanessa to honor our grandmother's wishes and our inheritance agreement. Which was what exactly? Richard asked, his business mind clearly engaged. Now, if one of us wanted to live in the house, they would buy out the other's share at fair market value, I explained. Or if neither wanted to live here, we would sell it and split the proceeds. Grandma was very clear, and her will is very specific. Brandon launched into a series of excuses about market timing and investment strategies, but Richard held up a hand to silence his son. Sarah, Richard said, suddenly all business, what is the current market value of this property? I quoted a figure that made Brandon choke on his wine. That's outrageous, he sputtered. This neighborhood isn't worth half that. Actually, I replied calmly, I have 3 independent appraisals confirming that value. The historic designation of the house, the 3 acres of landscaped gardens, and the recent development of luxury condos 2 blocks away have all significantly increased the property value. Richard's eyebrows raised slightly. I could almost see him doing calculations in his head. And you're entitled to half of that? Yes, I said simply. Plus 5 years of fair market rent for the half I own that they've been living in without. Compensation. Brandon's face turned an alarming shade of purple. You expect us to pay you rent? After we've maintained this place? After all the money we've put into it? Money you spent without consulting me, making changes I never approved to a house I partially own, I reminded him. And yes, I expect you to compensate me for using my property for 5 years while deliberately avoiding any discussion of buying out my share. Vanessa was openly crying now, but I recognized the tears. They were the same ones she used to deploy when we were children, and she wanted to get her way. You're trying to make us homeless, she accused. Your own family. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. For 5 years, I'd been living in a tiny studio apartment, scraping by on my teacher's salary, unable to afford a down payment on a home of my own, because the inheritance that should have provided it was being withheld by the very people now, accusing me of cruelty. No, Vanessa, I said quietly. I'm simply asking for what's rightfully mine, what our grandmother intended for both of us to have. And if we refuse? Brandon demanded, though his bluster was clearly fading as the reality of the situation sank in. Then we go to court, I said. I have an excellent attorney who has been documenting every attempt I've made to resolve this amicably over the past 5 years. Every ignored email, every canceled meeting, every broken promise. The dining room fell silent except for Vanessa's theatrical sniffling. You know what I don't understand, I continued, looking directly at my sister. Why? Did you do this, Vanessa? We were always close growing up. What changed? For a moment, something like shame flickered across my sister's face before her expression hardened again. You don't understand what it's like, Sarah. The pressure of maintaining appearances, of being a Wellington. This house, it needed to reflect our status. By erasing every trace of our grandmother? I asked. By pretending we didn't grow up solidly middle class, the daughters of a nurse and a high school history teacher? You've always been content with mediocrity, Vanessa shot back. That ancient car, your tiny apartment, your teaching job. Some of us wanted more. Her words stung, but not in the way she intended. They simply confirmed what I had increasingly suspected. My sister was ashamed of our upbringing, ashamed of me, ashamed of everything that didn't fit into the glossy lifestyle she'd constructed for herself. I'm not content with mediocrity, Vanessa, I said quietly. I'm proud of our parents. I'm proud of my work teaching children who might not otherwise have someone who believes in them. And I was proud of our family. Until you decided we weren't good enough for you anymore. Richard Wellington cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, when emotions aren't running so high. I agree, I said, standing up. My attorney's contact information is in the envelope. I suggest you consult with your own legal counsel promptly. The 30-day clock is already ticking. Brandon's face was a mix of fury and fear. You won't get away with this. I slung my purse over my shoulder, oddly calm despite the chaos. I'd just unleashed. It's not about getting away with anything, Brandon. It's about justice delayed but not denied. Vanessa made one last attempt. Sarah, please, where would we go? What would people say? For a moment, the little girl who had shared my childhood bedroom flashed across her face. The sister who had once been my best friend before status and appearance became her gods. You have options, Vanessa, I said gently. You can buy my half of the house. You can sell it and use your half of the proceeds to buy something else. Or you can finally sit down with me like adults and work out a compromise that honors what Grandma wanted for both of us. As I turned to leave, Zoe, my niece who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Aunt Sarah? I paused, looking at the 15-year-old girl who had Grandma Rose's eyes. Yes, Zoe? I remember, she said quietly. I remember when you used to show me the different roses in the greenhouse. I was little, but I remember. For the first time that evening, I felt tears prick my eyes. They're heritage roses. Some of them don't exist anywhere else in the world anymore. I know, she said, ignoring her mother's sharp intake of breath. Grandma showed me the books where you pressed them together. I nodded, unable to trust my voice for a moment. I'd be happy to show you again sometime if you'd like. I'd like that, she said, earning a glare from her father. As I walked out to my old but reliable Toyota, parked conspicuously between Brandon's Tesla and Richard's Mercedes, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of injustice I'd been carrying had finally been set down. My phone buzzed as I slid into the driver's seat. A text from my best friend Layla. How did it go? Do I need to bring wine or bail money? I smiled as I typed my reply. Neither. Just bring moving boxes. I think I'm finally getting my inheritance. As I drove away from the house that had been at the center of so much family drama, I wondered what Grandma Rose would think of all this. She had been a kind woman, but also fiercely fair. I like to think she would approve of me finally standing up for myself. The manila envelope had sat in my desk drawer for nearly 2 months before I found the courage to serve it. 2 months. Of sleepless nights, of wondering if I was doing the right thing, of questioning whether family peace, however false, was worth the continued injustice. But something had changed when I received the text from Vanessa last week. Dinner Sunday, 6 p.m. Don't be late for once. Not a question, not an invitation, a command. And then yesterday, seeing the construction company surveying the greenhouse, preparing to demolish it without even telling me. That had been the final straw. My small apartment welcomed me home with its familiar comfort. It might not be a sprawling Victorian, but it was mine, filled with books I loved, artwork that spoke to me, and several carefully tended pots of Grandma Rose's heritage roses that I had quietly rescued before Vanessa and Brandon took over the house. I kicked off my shoes and settled onto my worn but comfortable sofa, suddenly exhausted from the confrontation but also exhilarated. For 5 years, I had been the accommodating one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't make waves. But tonight, I had finally stood up for myself. My phone rang. Layla again. "Okay, I'm dying here," she said when I answered. "Give me details." So I told her everything: the shocked faces, Brandon's anger, Vanessa's tears, Richard's calculations, and Zoe's unexpected moment of connection. "I can't believe you actually did it," Layla said when I finished. "After all this time." "Neither can I admitted. "But it was time. More than time." "What do you think they'll do?" I sighed, considering the question. "Brandon's too proud to leave without a fight. But Richard's a businessman. He'll do the math and realize fighting me in court will cost more than it's worth, especially since the law and the will are clearly on my side." "So you think they'll buy you out?" "Probably," I said. "Although, honestly, part of me would love to see that house filled with a family that would appreciate it for what it is, not what it could be turned into with enough marble and stainless steel." We talked a while longer before hanging up. I made myself a cup of tea, Grandma Rose's favorite Earl Grey, and carried it to the window that overlooked the city. In the distance, I could just make out the neighborhood where our family home stood. My phone buzzed again, an email this time, from Brandon's father. "Sarah, would like to meet tomorrow to discuss a potential resolution to this situation. Without Brandon and Vanessa present initially, please advise if 10 a.m. at my office would work for you. Richard Wellington." Interesting. I hadn't expected Richard to take the lead so quickly. Perhaps he recognized the losing position his son was in, or perhaps he was simply a pragmatist who knew when it was time to cut losses and move forward. Either way, it was a start. A sign that my stand had been the right move, however difficult it had been to make. I replied with a simple, "I'll be there," with my attorney. Setting down my phone, I moved to the small balcony where my container garden flourished. Among the plants sat 3 carefully tended roses, cuttings from Grandma Rose's most precious varieties. Even in my tiny apartment, I had kept her legacy alive. Tomorrow would bring negotiations and probably more conflict. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was honoring not just my grandmother's memory, but also myself. The path of least resistance had been tempting for so long. To remain silent, to accept the scraps my sister and brother-in-law tossed my way, to let go of what was rightfully mine in the name of family peace. But Grandma Rose hadn't raised me that way. "Stand tall like the roses," she used to say when I was little. "They have thorns for a reason." Tonight, I had finally shown my thorns. And somehow, despite the drama and tension, it felt like coming home to myself. I sipped my tea and watched the city lights twinkle, wondering what tomorrow would bring, but no longer afraid to face it. Whatever happened next, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming not just my inheritance, but my voice. Richard Wellington's office was nothing like I expected. Instead of the ostentatious display of wealth I'd anticipated, it was surprisingly modest. All clean lines and understated elegance. Perhaps the reason Brandon was so obsessed with appearances was because his father didn't share that particular insecurity. My attorney, Maya Chen, sat beside me, her expression professionally neutral as Richard entered the room. I had met Maya 5 years ago at a school fundraiser where she was supporting her niece. When she'd mentioned she specialized in estate law, I'd filed that information away, never imagining how crucial it would become. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," Richard said, extending his hand first to me, then to Maya. "And you must be Ms. Chen. I appreciate you both making time for this meeting." "Of course," Maya replied, her voice pleasant but firm. "I understand you wanted to discuss a resolution to the matter of Rose Carter's estate." Richard nodded. settling into his chair. I'll be direct. After reviewing the documentation Sarah provided last night, it's clear that the situation is not what Brandon and Vanessa led me to believe. What exactly did they tell you? I asked, genuinely curious. Richard sighed, removing his glasses to polish them, a gesture that reminded me, oddly enough, of my father. They said Rose had left the house to Vanessa as the elder grandchild, with some vague visitation rights for you. They mentioned nothing about joint ownership or a buyout requirement. I felt a fresh wave of hurt at this revelation. Not only had they kept me from my inheritance, they had actively lied about Grandma's wishes. That is categorically false, Maya stated, opening her portfolio. I have a copy of Rose Carter's will here, which clearly states— Richard held up a hand. That won't be necessary. I obtained a copy from the county records office first thing this morning. The terms are quite clear. This surprised me. Richard had done his homework, and quickly. Then you understand why my client has been forced to take legal action after 5 years of attempted resolution, Maya continued. I do, Richard said, and to my surprise, he looked directly at me with what appeared to be genuine regret. Sarah, I owe you an apology. Had I known the true situation, I would have advised Brandon and Vanessa very differently from the beginning. The apology caught me off guard. I had been prepared for resistance, for legal maneuvering, for anything except contrition. I appreciate that, I said cautiously, but it doesn't change the fact that I've been denied my inheritance for 5 years. No, it doesn't, Richard agreed, surprising me further. Which is why I've asked you here without Brandon and Vanessa present. I believe it's time for a practical solution that respects your grandmother's wishes and your rights. Maya and I exchanged glances. This was going better than either of us had anticipated. I'm listening, I said. Richard leaned forward, placing his folded hands on the desk. I propose to personally purchase your half of the property at the highest of the 3 appraisal values you've obtained, plus 5 years of fair market rent as you requested. The transaction would be completed within 30 days, and all legal fees would be covered by me. Maya's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slight raise of her eyebrow. This was a surprisingly generous offer, especially the part about using my highest appraisal figure, not an average of the 3. Why would you do that? I asked. Why not let Brandon and Vanessa handle their own situation? Richard's expression shifted, revealing a glimpse of the shrewd businessman beneath the grandfatherly exterior. Because I've spent 40 years building Wellington Development into a respected company. My son's actions, concealing joint ownership, making unauthorized modifications to a property he doesn't fully own, ignoring legal correspondence, these things reflect poorly on our family name and potentially our business. Ah, there it was. This wasn't about doing right by me. It was about protecting the Wellington reputation. Somehow that made more sense than sudden altruism. There would need to be additional terms, Maya interjected smoothly. The back rent would need to include interest. Of course, Richard agreed without hesitation. And we would require a non-disclosure agreement from all parties, Maya continued. My client has no interest in damaging anyone's reputation, but she would expect the same courtesy in return. Richard nodded. Reasonable. Anything else? Maya glanced at me, and I took a deep breath. This was the moment to speak up about what really mattered to me. The greenhouse and gardens, I said. Grandma Rose's heritage roses. They need to be preserved, not destroyed for a pool deck. Richard's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. You're in a position to demand full market value for your half of the property, yet your first specific request is about flowers? They're more than just flowers, I said quietly. They're her legacy. Some of those varieties don't exist anywhere else. They've been cultivated through 5 generations of our family. The room fell silent for a moment. Richard studied me with new interest. You're very different from your sister, he finally said. We always have been, I agreed. But we used to complement each other instead of clash. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I cannot commit to what Brandon and Vanessa will do with the property once it's legally theirs. But I can include a conservation easement for the greenhouse and gardens as a condition of the sale. It would legally prevent anyone, including future owners, from destroying or substantially altering those areas. I hadn't expected this level of understanding, much less a practical solution. That would be acceptable, I said, trying to maintain my professional demeanor despite the wave of relief that washed over me. Maya, ever the excellent attorney, didn't let emotion derail the negotiation. We would also require that any existing architectural plans for renovations be amended to exclude the greenhouse and garden areas, with confirmation from the contractors. Agreed, Richard said promptly. Now, shall we discuss the financial details more specifically? For the next hour, Maya and Richard hammered out terms while I occasionally interjected with questions or concerns. By the time we finished, we had the framework of an agreement that would not only provide me with my fair share of the inheritance, but would also protect Grandma Rose's botanical legacy. As Maya gathered her materials, Richard asked, Would you mind if I spoke with Sarah privately for a moment? Maya looked to me for direction. It's fine, I assured her. I'll meet you in the lobby in a few minutes. After Maya left, Richard's professional demeanor softened slightly. Off the record, Sarah, why did you wait 5 years to take legal action? The will was clear. You could have enforced your rights immediately after your grandmother's death. It was a fair question, one I had asked myself countless times. Vanessa is my only sister, I said simply. After our parents died in that car accident during our college years, we only had each other and Grandma Rose. I kept hoping Vanessa would remember that. Remember who we were before Brandon, before she decided our middle-class upbringing was something to be ashamed of. Richard nodded slowly. Brandon has always been status-conscious, more so than his mother or I raised him to be. Perhaps that's partly our fault. We all make our own choices, I said. Vanessa chose to reject our past. I chose to honor it. And yet you're not vindictive, Richard observed. You could have demanded much more, pursued damages, created a public spectacle. Instead, you've been remarkably measured, even in your justified anger. I thought about this for a moment. Grandma Rose used to say that anger is like drinking, poison and expecting the other person to die. I've been angry for 5 years. It hasn't changed Vanessa, but it has certainly hurt me. Richard smiled slightly. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, I agreed. She also believed that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean tearing others down. I don't want to destroy Vanessa's life. I just want what's rightfully mine, and to preserve what matters. Richard rose, signaling the end of our conversation. The legal documents should be ready for review in a few days. In the meantime, he hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small key. This might be premature, but I have a feeling our agreement will proceed smoothly. This is a key to the greenhouse. Brandon changed the locks 2 years ago, I believe. I stared at the key, emotions suddenly threatening to overwhelm my professional composure. How did you get this? I had a long conversation with my son last night, Richard said, his expression unreadable. He was remarkably forthcoming once he understood the legal reality of the situation. I accepted the key, its weight in my palm somehow more significant than the substantial financial settlement we had just negotiated. Thank you. Don't thank me, Richard said with unexpected frankness. I'm doing this to protect my family's interests and reputation. The fact that it happens to align with what's right in this instance is convenient. His honesty was refreshing. Even so, I appreciate it. As I turned to leave, Richard added, Sarah, one more thing. My granddaughter, Zoe. She mentioned wanting to learn about those roses. Perhaps when things settle down. I nodded, touched by the gesture. She'd be welcome any time, regardless of what happens between the adults in our families. The lobby of Richard's office building was flooded with morning sunlight as I joined Maya near the entrance. She looked up from her phone with a questioning expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. I held up the greenhouse key. "Better than okay. I think we just won more than I expected." Maya smiled, a genuine expression rarely seen during negotiations. "You deserve it. Not many clients would have shown the patience and restraint you have." As we walked toward the parking lot, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Not just the burden of the inheritance dispute, but something deeper. For 5 years, I had doubted myself, had wondered if I was being unreasonable, too demanding, not family-minded enough. The validation from both Maya and, surprisingly, Richard Wellington himself felt like permission to finally release that self-doubt. "What will you do with your settlement?" Maya asked as we reached our cars, her sleek modern sedan parked beside my reliable but aging Toyota. I ran my hand along my car's faded paint, the very vehicle Brandon had mocked just last night. "First, I'm going to keep driving this car," I said with a smile. "It's paid off, runs perfectly, and gets me where I need to go." Maya laughed. "And second?" "I'm going to buy a small house with a big garden," I said, the plan crystallizing as I spoke it aloud. "Nothing fancy, but something that's mine, with enough yard space to plant some of Grandma's roses where they can flourish." "That sounds perfect," Maya said. "You know, when we first met and you told me about your situation, I expected a much more complicated case. Family property disputes usually get extraordinarily messy." "I never wanted messy," I admitted. "I just wanted fair." "And you got it," Maya said, checking her watch. "I need to get to court, but I'll call you once the paperwork starts coming through. Expect about a week before everything's ready to sign." After Maya drove away, I sat in my car for a moment, the greenhouse key resting in my palm. 5 years. Of patience, of swallowing hurt, of trying to maintain family connections despite continuous disrespect. And it had come down to this small piece of metal. On impulse, I started my car and headed toward Grandma Rose's house. Our house, technically, though it hadn't felt like mine for years. I had no intention of confronting Vanessa or Brandon again so soon. That would be unnecessarily antagonistic. But the greenhouse called to me, and now I had the key to answer that call. The neighborhood was quiet on a Tuesday morning, most residents off at work or school. I parked a block away and walked the familiar path to the back of the property, where a wrought iron gate led directly to the gardens. The gate creaked slightly as it always had, a sound that brought back a flood of memories. Grandma teaching me the Latin names of plants, Mom and Dad helping her mulch the flower beds each spring, Vanessa and I playing hide-and-seek among the roses as children, before appearances and status became more important than family history. The greenhouse stood at the far end of the garden, its Victorian architecture a graceful complement to the main house. From the outside, it looked largely unchanged, a small miracle given Brandon and Vanessa's determination to modernize everything else. My hand trembled slightly as I fitted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. The scent hit me immediately, that distinctive blend of earth, moisture, and roses that was so uniquely associated with my grandmother in my memory. I stepped inside, allowing my eyes to adjust to the diffused light. What I saw made my breath catch. The greenhouse was immaculate, not just maintained, but lovingly tended. Every plant was thriving, every surface clean, every specialized tool in its proper place. This was not the work of neglect, nor even of basic maintenance. This was dedicated care. "I thought you might come here." I whirled around to find Zoe standing in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. "Shouldn't you be in school?" I asked, too surprised to say anything else. Half day, teacher development, she explained, stepping into the greenhouse. I saw your car down the block. I looked around at the perfectly maintained space. Zoe, who's been taking care of the greenhouse? She shrugged, suddenly interested in examining a leaf. Mostly me. Sometimes Maria helps when I have too much homework. I stared at my niece in astonishment. This vibrant, healthy collection of rare plants represented hundreds of hours of dedicated work. Does your mother know? I asked. Zoe shook her head. Mom never comes out here. Dad wanted to tear it down last year, but I told him I was using it for a long-term biology project. He likes when I do anything that might look good on college applications. My heart swelled with unexpected emotion. You've done an amazing job, Zoe. Grandma Rose would be so proud. She beamed at the praise. Really? I've been using her notebooks, the ones in the cabinet over there. They're super detailed about each plant's needs. I moved to the old wooden cabinet and opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of my grandmother's meticulously kept gardening journals, each one documenting years of horticultural knowledge. I had assumed these had been thrown away or boxed up in the attic with my other belongings. I found them when Mom was going to have Maria clear everything out, Zoe explained, watching me. I kind of hid them in my room for a while, then brought them back out here when I started working on the plants. Zoe, do you understand what's happening with the house? I asked gently, wondering how much her parents had told her. She met my gaze directly, suddenly looking older than her 15 years. You own half of it. Mom and Dad never paid you for your part. Now you're making them either pay up or move out. Her straightforward summary was impressively accurate. And how do you feel about that? Zoe considered the question carefully. It's fair, she finally said. Mom always taught us that we have to pay for things we want, that nothing in life is free. A small, ironic smile played across her face. I guess she forgot that applies to her too. I couldn't help but laugh at her insight. That's very mature of you. She shrugged again. Grandpa Richard called this morning. He said they're buying your half of the house, but the greenhouse and gardens will be protected forever. Is that true? It looks that way, I confirmed. We're still working out the details, but yes, this space will be preserved. Relief washed over her face. Good. I was worried about what would happen to the roses. You really care about them, don't you? I observed. Zoe moved to a particularly vibrant plant covered in deep crimson blooms. This one's my favorite. Grandma Rose's journals say it's called Remembrance, and that it was developed by her great-grandmother. I joined her beside the plant, gently touching one of the velvety petals. That's right. It won several awards in the 1930s. The original plant is documented in the American Rose Society archives. Really? Zoe's eyes widened with interest. I didn't know that part. For the next hour, we moved through the greenhouse together, with me sharing stories and historical details about each variety that went beyond even Grandma's meticulous notes. Zoe absorbed everything eagerly, occasionally adding her own observations, about which growing conditions had produced the best results. You have a natural talent for this, I told her as we finished our impromptu tour. Not everyone can make roses thrive the way you have. She looked pleased but embarrassed by the poor compliment. It's just following instructions, really. No, I said firmly. Plenty of people can follow instructions. What you've done here takes passion and intuition. You've connected with these plants in a way that Grandma Rose would have deeply appreciated. Zoe hesitated, then asked, Will you still, once everything's settled with the house and all, will you still come visit the greenhouse sometimes? Maybe teach me more about the roses? The question touched me deeply. Despite everything that had happened between the adults in our family, this connection with my niece was something pure and worth preserving. Of course I will, I promised. Anytime you want. She smiled. Genuine expression that reminded me of the little girl who used to beg for piggyback rides around this very garden. Cool. I should probably get back to the house before Mom realizes I'm out here with you. She's kind of on the warpath today. I could imagine. Zoe, I'm sorry if the situation with the house is making things difficult for you. She gave me a surprisingly wise look. Adults always think kids don't notice stuff, but we do. I've known for years that something wasn't right about the way Mom and Dad treated you. I just didn't know what to do about it. You didn't have to do anything, I assured her. This was never your responsibility to fix. Maybe, she allowed. But I'm glad I saved the greenhouse at least. That feels like something Grandma Rose would have wanted. As Zoe slipped away toward the main house, I took one last look around the greenhouse. What had begun as a simple desire to see this space, again had turned into something unexpected. The discovery that Grandma Rose's legacy lived on, not just in the plants, but in the granddaughter who shared her name and, apparently, her passion for nurturing growing things. I carefully locked the greenhouse behind me, the key now feeling like a bridge rather than just a symbol of ownership. A bridge between generations, between past and future, between what was lost and what might still be saved. The legal paperwork arrived the following week, delivered to my apartment by courier in a heavy manila envelope stamped with Richard Wellington's law firm's logo. I signed for it with a surprisingly steady hand, considering its contents would effectively close a painful 5-year chapter of my life. I cleared my small dining table, made a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea, and spread out the documents. Maya had already reviewed everything and assured me it was exactly as we'd negotiated. Fair market value for my half of the property, 5 years, of back rent with interest, and most importantly, a legally binding conservation easement for the greenhouse and gardens. As I carefully reviewed each page, my phone buzzed with a text from Layla. Signing day? Want moral support? I smiled, typing back, all good, we'll call you after. Dinner tonight to celebrate? Her response came immediately. Absolutely. Open. That bottle of champagne I've been saving for this day. Layla had been my rock throughout this ordeal. While I'd been busy second-guessing myself, she'd been absolutely certain of the righteousness of my cause. It's not about the money, she'd insisted time and again. It's about respect, about honoring your grandmother's wishes. And she was. Right. The settlement sum was substantial, enough to buy a modest house outright in most neighborhoods, with plenty left over for my dream of returning to graduate school for a master's degree in education. But this had never been primarily about money. It had been about justice, about standing up for myself, and about preserving something precious that might otherwise have been lost. I was on the final page when a knock at my door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the courier had already delivered the documents. Cautiously, I looked through the peephole. Vanessa stood in the hallway, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to finish signing the documents in peace and move on with my life. But another part, perhaps the part that still remembered building blanket forts with her when we were children, couldn't turn her away without at least hearing what she had to say. I opened the door, but remained in the doorway, neither inviting her in nor sending her away. Vanessa, I said, keeping my voice neutral, this is unexpected. My sister looked past me into the apartment, spotting the legal documents spread across the table. You're signing the papers, she observed, her voice flat. I am, I confirmed. Maya reviewed everything and said it's all in order. Vanessa nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. Dad said you've been more than fair with the terms. I found it interesting that she was now referring to Richard as Dad, something she only did when trying to emphasize her connection to the Wellington family. Was there something you needed? I prompted when she fell silent. Vanessa looked up and, to my surprise, her eyes were filled with unshed tears. Can I come in, please? just for a few minutes. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside to let her enter. She moved tentatively into my small living space, looking around as if seeing it for the first time, though she had visited a handful of times over the years, always with an air of barely concealed condescension toward my modest lifestyle. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, falling back on the manners our mother had instilled in us. "No, thank you," she added belatedly, perching on the edge of my sofa as if afraid to fully commit to sitting in my apartment. I took the armchair opposite her, waiting. Whatever had brought her here, I wasn't going to make it easier by filling the silence. "I saw you at the house yesterday," she finally said, "with Zoe, in the greenhouse. So much for our discretion." "Yes. She never told me she was the one maintaining it all this time," Vanessa continued, a note of hurt in her voice. "I thought the gardener was just following through on standing instructions." I bit back my immediate response, that perhaps Vanessa might have known if she'd ever shown any interest in her daughter's activities beyond their resume-building potential. "Zoe has a natural talent for it," I said instead. "She's preserved some very rare and valuable plants." Vanessa nodded slowly. "She told me that last night. She also told me that you've promised to continue teaching her about the roses, even after everything." "I have," I confirmed, "if that's all right with you and Brandon." A complicated expression crossed my sister's face. Part sorrow, part pride, part something I couldn't quite identify. "Brandon moved out yesterday. He's staying at his parents' house for now." This was unexpected. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Vanessa gave a small, bitter laugh. "Are you? After what we did to you?" I considered her question carefully. "I never wished for your marriage to fail, Vanessa, despite everything." "No, you wouldn't," she said softly. "You were always the better person." The admission hung in the air between us, loaded with 5 years of unspoken resentments and regrets. "Why are you here?" I finally asked, bringing us back to the present moment. Vanessa took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "To apologize, though I know that's inadequate." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "When Grandma Rose died," she began haltingly, "Brandon convinced me that we deserved that house more than you did, that we had the right social position, to maintain it properly, to be part of the right neighborhood circles." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. "He said you wouldn't appreciate its value, that you'd probably just sell your half for whatever you could get and waste the money on? I don't know, teaching supplies or charity cases." Each word stung, confirming what I had suspected but never wanted to believe, that my own sister had such a low opinion of me. "And you believed him," I said, not a question but a statement. "I wanted to," she admitted. "It made it easier to justify what we were doing. And then once we started down that path, it became harder and harder to find a way back." "You had 5 years of opportunities," I pointed out, unable to keep the edge from my voice. 5 years of me asking, begging sometimes for us, to sit down and work this out fairly. "I know," she whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see it now. What we did. How wrong it was." Part of me wanted to demand more explanation, more atonement, more recognition of the hurt she had caused. But looking at my sister, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. Not just because she had been caught or because her marriage was suffering, but because she truly recognized the harm she had done. "What happens now?" I asked, softening my tone slightly. "With you and Brandon?" Vanessa shrugged, a gesture so unlike her usual calculated movements. "I don't know." When Richard told us about the conservation easement for the greenhouse and gardens, Brandon was furious. He said if we couldn't develop the property the way we wanted, it wasn't worth the investment. We had a huge fight about it. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I told him I agreed with the easement, that some things are worth preserving, even if they don't appreciate in financial value. This was perhaps the most surprising thing she had said yet. And that led to him leaving? Among other things, she said vaguely. Let's just say the past week has been illuminating about who Brandon really is and who I've become, while trying to be the perfect Wellington wife. I nodded, understanding more than she might realize. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years of estrangement between us. The papers, Vanessa said finally, gesturing toward my dining table. Dad said you're getting a fair settlement, enough to buy your own place. Yes, I confirmed. I've already been looking at small houses with good garden space. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. For Grandma's roses? Zoe will be disappointed if you take them all. Not all, I assured her. Just cuttings, enough to start my own collection. The originals will stay in the greenhouse where they belong. Vanessa nodded, seeming relieved. She glanced around my apartment again, this time with what appeared to be new eyes. You know, I always felt sorry for you, living in this tiny place while we had the big house. But you've made it really nice. It feels like you. The backhanded compliment was so typically Vanessa that I almost laughed. Thanks. It's small, but it's been home. She stood abruptly, as if having reached the limit of her emotional capacity for one conversation. I should go. You need to finish signing those papers. I rose as well, walking her to the door. As she stepped into the hallway, she turned back. Sarah, thank you for being kind to Zoe through all of this, for not punishing her for our mistakes. She's my niece, I said simply, and she's carrying on Grandma Rose's legacy in her own way. That's something to be nurtured, not punished. Vanessa nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears again. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what Grandma saw in those roses, why they mattered so much to her, to you. It wasn't quite an apology, nor a promise of reconciliation, but it was something, a crack in the wall that had grown between us over the years. Goodbye, Vanessa, I said gently. Goodbye, Sarah, she replied, and then added, for now. After she left, I returned to the dining table and methodically signed each marked page of the legal documents. With each signature, I felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. When I finished, I carefully gathered the papers, returned them to their envelope, and sealed it for delivery back to Richard's office. My phone buzzed with another text from Layla. Should I bring the champagne to your place or mine tonight? I smiled as I typed my response. Actually, change of plans. Let's go house hunting this weekend instead. I think it's time to start looking toward the future. Later that evening, as Layla and I sat on my small balcony sharing that bottle of champagne she'd been saving, I recounted Vanessa's unexpected visit. Do you think you'll be able to forgive her? Layla asked, refilling our glasses. I gazed out at the city lights, considering the question. I think forgiveness is a process, not an event. Today was a start. Ever the English teacher with your precise definitions? Layla teased gently. I laughed. Occupational hazard. Speaking of which, Layla said, have you thought more about that master's program in education leadership? With your settlement, you could afford to go part-time while still teaching. I've been looking at the application requirements, I admitted. The deadline is next month. You should do it, Layla said, raising her glass. Here's to Sarah Matthews, future school principal extraordinaire. I clinked my glass against hers. I don't know about that, but I do know I want to make a bigger difference in education. Maybe develop programs for underserved communities, or create better support systems for new teachers. Always thinking about how to help others, Layla observed. Even after everything you've been through, that's still where your mind goes first. I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. Despite the injustice I'd experienced, my instinct was still to look for ways to create positive change rather than dwell on past hurts. I think that's what Grandma Rose taught me, I said thoughtfully. She used to say that difficulty either makes you bitter or better, and the choice is yours. Wise woman, your grandmother, Layla said. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, I assured her. She always appreciated people who speak their mind. We fell into comfortable silence, enjoying the night air and the subtle shift I could feel taking place within me. A sense of possibilities opening up where before there had only been frustration and stagnation. You know what I keep thinking. "'Bout?" I said after a while. "That dinner last week, how they laughed at my car, how superior they all felt, and all the while, I had that eviction notice in my purse." "Poetic justice," Layla agreed with a grin. "But it's more than that," I continued, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "For 5 years, they underestimated me, dismissed me, assumed I would just keep accepting whatever scraps of family connection they offered." "Their mistake," Layla said, raising her glass again. "Yes, but also my lesson," I replied. "I spent too long doubting myself, wondering if I was being unreasonable, if I should just let it go for the sake of peace. And now?" I smiled, feeling a confidence that had been building slowly since that night at the dinner table when I'd finally stood up for myself. Now I know that standing up for what's right isn't selfish, that demanding fair treatment isn't unreasonable, that my worth isn't determined by someone else's assessment. "I'll drink to that," Layla said emphatically. The next morning, I drove to Richard's office to deliver the signed documents. The receptionist informed me that Richard was in a meeting, but had left instructions to accept the envelope directly from me. As I handed it over, a strange sense of lightness came over me, as if I'd not only divested myself of a legal burden, but an emotional one as well. On impulse, instead of heading straight home, I drove to a neighborhood I'd been researching online, a modest area with older homes, good-sized yards, and a community garden at its center. A small for sale sign stood in front of a cottage-style house with a deep front yard already planted with mature flower beds. It wasn't fancy or impressive, nothing like the grand Victorian I'd just signed away my claim to, but it had character and charm, and most importantly, potential. I parked across the street and studied it, trying to envision myself there. Planting a section of Grandma's roses along the sunny south-facing wall, setting up a reading nook in what appeared to be a bay window, creating the kind of home that would welcome visitors with warmth rather than intimidate them with grandeur. A realtor emerged from the front door, placing a "Open House Today" sign near the sidewalk. Our eyes met, and she waved invitingly. "Just getting set up," she called. "But you're welcome to come in early if you'd like a peek before the crowds arrive." I hesitated only briefly before getting out of my car. As I walked up the stone path to the front door, I noticed wildflowers growing between the pavers. Not weeds, but deliberately planted native species that would attract butterflies and bees. It seemed like a good omen. "I'm Laura," the realtor introduced herself. "And this little gem just came on the market yesterday." "I'm Sarah," I replied, already feeling drawn to the house's unpretentious charm. The interior was just as appealing. Original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves flanking a brick fireplace, and a kitchen that, while dated, had plenty of natural light and space for an herb garden on the windowsill. The previous owner was a botany professor, Laura explained as she showed me through to the backyard. He designed all the gardens himself. The backyard took my breath away. Though modest in size, it had been thoughtfully landscaped with curving beds, a small pond, and a charming greenhouse that, while not as grand as Grandma Rose's Victorian structure, was well built and perfectly sized for a dedicated hobbyist. "The greenhouse is insulated and has water and electricity," Laura pointed out. "Professor Jenkins used to grow orchids in there year-round." I stepped inside, inhaling the familiar earthy scent that reminded me so much of childhood afternoons spent with my grandmother. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, creating patterns on the wooden workbenches that lined the walls. "It's perfect," I whispered, more to myself than to Laura. "The professor's family is motivated to sell to someone who will appreciate." "The gardens," Laura mentioned. "They've had offers from developers who would probably tear everything out and maximize the lot space." I ran my hand along one of the workbenches, imagining pots of Grandma's roses lined up in various stages of cultivation. "I would never do that. These gardens deserve to be preserved and nurtured." Laura smiled, seeming to sense a kindred spirit. "Should I get you the disclosure documents and information on making an offer?" I thought about the settlement money that would be in my account within days, about the fresh start this house represented, about how fitting it seemed that Grandma Rose's legacy would help me create a new space where her beloved plants could continue to thrive. Yes, I decided, feeling a certainty I hadn't experienced in years. This is exactly what I've been looking for. 2 hours later, I left with a signed offer in process, contingent on inspection, but otherwise straightforward. As I drove back to my apartment, I called Layla with the news. "You did what?" she exclaimed. "Sarah Matthews making a major life decision without overthinking it for 6 months? Who are you and what have you done with my best friend?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I know, it's not like me, but when I saw this place, especially the greenhouse, it just felt right, like it was waiting for me." "Well, I think it's fantastic," Layla declared. "This is the new Sarah, decisive, confident, going after what she wants." "The greenhouse needs some repairs," I said, already making mental lists. "And the kitchen could use updating eventually. But the bones of the house are solid, and the gardens are incredible." "Listen to you, talking about bones and solid like a real property owner," Layla teased. "Next thing you know, you'll be shopping for power tools and watching home renovation shows." I smiled at the image. Maybe I will. This is my chance. To create exactly the home I want, not just adapt to someone else's vision. Which, I realized, was precisely what I'd been doing for too long, adapting to others' visions rather than pursuing my own. Whether it was Vanessa and Brandon's ideas about the family home, or even my own reluctance to move forward while the inheritance issue remained unresolved. "That settlement money was always rightfully yours," Layla said, echoing my thoughts. "It's fitting that you're using it to build something meaningful." "I think Grandma Rose would approve," I agreed. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed with a text. From Zoe. "Mom told me you're buying a house with a greenhouse. Can I come see it sometime?" The simple request warmed my heart. Despite everything that had happened between the adults in our family, this connection with my niece felt like a precious new shoot growing from old roots. "Absolutely," I texted back. "And maybe you can help me decide which roses to plant first." Her response came immediately. "Yes, I've been reading about grafting techniques. Maybe we could try some hybrid experiments." I smiled at her enthusiasm, so reminiscent of my own at her age. Definitely. Grandma Rose would love that idea. As I walked up to my apartment, keys in hand, I realized something profound had shifted within me. The inheritance dispute that had dominated so much of my emotional energy for 5 years was resolved, yes. But more importantly, I had reclaimed something beyond money or property rights. I had reclaimed my sense of self-worth, my ability to stand firm in my convictions, and my belief that honoring the past didn't mean being stuck in it. The future stretched before me now, full of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. A new home with space to grow, graduate studies to advance my career, the chance to mentor Zoe in carrying forward a family tradition, and perhaps even the beginning of a healing process with Vanessa. Not all the wounds of the past 5 years would heal overnight. Some trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But as I unlocked my apartment door, I felt ready to begin that process. To move forward with confidence rather than resentment. To create rather than merely react. Grandma Rose's favorite saying came to mind as I stepped inside. Bloom where you're planted, but don't be afraid to transplant yourself when the soil no longer nourishes your roots. I had finally found the courage to do just that. 6 months later, the late autumn sunlight streamed through the bay window of my new home, illuminating the stack of graduate school applications on my writing desk. Outside, the garden was transitioning to its fall splendor, the summer blooms giving way to the rich golds, ambers, and burgundies of chrysanthemums and autumn sage. In the small greenhouse, sheltered from the increasingly chilly nights, Grandma Rose's heritage roses continued to thrive under my care. The house inspection had revealed a few issues: outdated electrical wiring, a roof that would need replacement within 2 years, and plumbing that groaned dramatically whenever the washing machine ran. But none of these discoveries had diminished my love for the place. If anything, the opportunity to restore and improve the cottage made it feel even more like mine. I had just sealed the last application envelope when the doorbell rang. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see Zoe's silhouette, her backpack slung over one shoulder as usual. "Right on time," I said as I opened the door. "I've got everything set up in the greenhouse." Zoe stepped inside, her eyes immediately going to the stack of envelopes on my desk. "Are those your grad school applications?" I nodded. "Just finished." "The last one. They're due next week." "Which schools?" she asked, setting down her backpack and shrugging off her light jacket. "University of Washington, Portland State, Reed College, and Stanford," I replied, though Stanford's a long shot. "No, it's not," Zoe said with the absolute confidence of youth. "You're brilliant. They'd be lucky to have you." I smiled at her unwavering faith in me. Over the past 6 months, our Saturday afternoon greenhouse sessions had evolved from simple horticultural lessons into wide-ranging conversations about everything from college aspirations to family dynamics to her budding interest in environmental science. "We'll see," I said. "The important thing is that I'm finally doing it, pursuing the advanced degree I've wanted for years." "Because you're not letting anyone hold you back anymore," Zoe observed shrewdly. "Exactly." I led her through to the kitchen, where I'd prepared a thermos of hot chocolate and a plate of homemade pumpkin cookies. Sustenance for serious greenhouse work. Zoe grinned, grabbing a cookie. "Mom says you've become quite the baker." "Your mother and I are talking about my baking skills now?" I asked, surprised. While Vanessa and I had established a cautious peace, our interactions remained limited and somewhat formal. "She noticed the cookie tin you sent home with me last week," Zoe explained. "Said they reminded her of the ones Grandma Rose used to make for you guys when you were kids." I hadn't consciously recreated our grandmother's recipe, but the observation touched me. Perhaps some connections ran deeper than we realized. "How are things at home?" I asked carefully as we gathered our greenhouse supplies. Zoe shrugged. "Quiet. Dad comes over for dinner sometimes, but it's still weird." From what little Vanessa had shared, she and Brandon were attempting a trial separation rather than rushing into divorce. Richard and Eleanor had purchased a condo for Brandon, close enough to remain involved in his children's lives but providing the space Vanessa had requested. "And the house?" I asked, knowing that Vanessa had been considering selling it once Aiden graduated high school next spring. "Mom's been talking to a historic preservation society," Zoe said, surprising me. "Something about designating it as a historic landmark to protect its architectural features. She mentioned you might know someone who could help with the paperwork?" This was news to me. "I do know someone at the Historical Society, yes, but your mother hasn't mentioned this to me." Zoe looked slightly guilty. She might be working up the courage to ask. You know how she is, doesn't like admitting she needs help. A quality the Carter sisters definitely shared, though I was working on mine. We made our way to the greenhouse, where I had prepared everything for today's lesson: propagating roses through hardwood cuttings, a technique Grandma Rose had perfected over decades. "Before we start," Zoe said, pulling something from her pocket, "I brought you these." She handed me a small envelope containing several seeds. "They're from the Remembrance Rose. I collected them when the hips were fully ripe, just like you taught me." The thoughtfulness of her gesture moved me deeply. "Thank you, Zoe. These are precious." "I know," she said seriously. "That's why I wanted you to have them for your garden here. So Grandma's roses will be growing in both places." As we worked side by side, preparing the cuttings and carefully placing them in the special rooting medium, I reflected on how this greenhouse had become a sanctuary for both of us, a place where the complications of family dynamics fell away, replaced by the simple, satisfying work of nurturing living things. "You know what I realized?" Zoe said as she carefully labeled a pot. "When I'm working with the roses, I never worry about college applications or what Dad thinks about my grades, or whether I'm wearing the right clothes. I just feel present." "That's exactly how I've always felt in the greenhouse," I told her. "It's like the plants only care about who you are right now, not your past mistakes or future worries." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think that's why Grandma Rose loved it so much?" "Partly," I agreed. "But I also think she loved creating something beautiful that would outlast her. These roses, some of these varieties have been in our family for generations. When you propagate them, you're connecting to all those gardeners who came before you, and all those who will come after." "Like a living legacy," Zoe said, carefully misting her cuttings. "Exactly like that." We worked in companionable silence for a while before Zoe spoke again. "I got early acceptance to the University of Washington," she said, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the pride in her voice. "Environmental science program." "Zoe, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for her. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" She shrugged, suddenly shy. "I just found out yesterday. You're the first person I've told, actually." "Not even your parents?" I asked, surprised. "I wanted to tell you first," she admitted, "because you never made me feel like I had to be perfect or follow some specific path. You just encouraged me to follow what I love." Her words touched me deeply. For all the pain and conflict of the past years, this connection with my niece felt like an unexpected gift, a reminder that sometimes the most important legacies aren't about property or possessions, but about values and passion transmitted to the next generation. "I'm so proud of you," I told her sincerely. "And UW has an excellent botany department too, if you want to continue studying plant science alongside environmental studies." "I know," she grinned. "I already looked into it. They even have a rare plant conservation program." As Zoe enthusiastically outlined her college plans, I marveled at the confident young woman she was becoming, so different from her status-conscious parents, with a genuine passion for nature and preservation that echoed Grandma Rose's values. We finished our greenhouse work and returned to the house, where I had prepared a simple lunch. As we ate, Zoe grew uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked, sensing something on her mind. She hesitated, then asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive Mom? Like, really forgive her?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because she misses you," Zoe said simply. She'd never admit it, but I can tell. When I talk about coming here, she always asks lots of questions about your house and what we're doing in the greenhouse. And sometimes she looks at old photo albums, the ones with pictures of you two when you were kids. I considered this revelation carefully. Vanessa and I had achieved a civil detente, but true reconciliation had seemed like too much to hope for after everything that had happened. "Forgiveness is complicated," I said finally, "but I think it's possible. Yes, it takes time, and trust needs to be rebuilt." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. Mom's different now, Since Dad moved out, she's more like, I don't know, more like the mom I remember from when I was really little, before we moved into Grandma's house. This aligned with my own limited observations. The few times Vanessa had picked Zoe up from our greenhouse sessions, she'd seemed less rigid, less concerned with appearances. Her designer clothes had given way to more casual attire, and she'd even expressed genuine interest in Zoe's botanical projects. People can change, I acknowledged, especially when they're forced to reevaluate what really matters. Like you. Did, Zoe pointed out. You changed too. Mom says you used to be super quiet and would do anything to avoid conflict, but then you stood up to all of them that night at dinner. I smiled at her perception. That's true. Sometimes we don't know our own strength until we're pushed to find it. After lunch, I walked Zoe out to where Vanessa was waiting in her car. No longer the luxury SUV she'd driven before, but a practical mid-size sedan. When Zoe mentioned her college acceptance, Vanessa's face lit up with genuine pride, rather than the social achievement I might have expected her to focus on in the past. Environmental science? Vanessa repeated. That's wonderful, honey. We should celebrate tonight. As Zoe got into the car, Vanessa hesitated, then turned to me. Sarah, I was wondering, would you like to join us? Nothing fancy, just dinner at the house to celebrate Zoe's news. The invitation surprised me, but I saw the sincerity in my sister's eyes and the hopeful look on Zoe's face. I'd like that, I said, making a spontaneous decision. What? Time? 6:30? Vanessa suggested. And Sarah, thank you for everything you've done for Zoe. She lights up when she talks about your greenhouse sessions. The simple acknowledgement, offered without qualification or defensiveness, felt like a significant step forward. She's a remarkable young woman, I replied. You should be proud. A look of understanding passed between us, brief but meaningful. Perhaps the seeds of reconciliation, like the rose cuttings in my greenhouse, just needed the right conditions and patient tending to take root. That evening, as I drove to what I still thought of as Grandma's house for the first planned family dinner in years, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and hope. I had avoided the Victorian mansion since claiming my inheritance, partly to give Vanessa space, and partly because it held too many complicated emotions. I parked my Toyota, still running perfectly despite Brandon's mockery, in the driveway and walked up the familiar path to the front door. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open to reveal Aiden, Zoe's older brother, whose previous interactions with me had been minimal at best. Aunt Sarah, he greeted me, surprising me with the familial term he'd rarely used before. Come in. Mom's in the kitchen, and Zoe's bouncing off the walls with excitement. The interior of the house had changed subtly since I'd last seen it. Some of Brandon's more ostentatious additions had been removed, replaced with simpler, more elegant pieces that better complemented the home's Victorian architecture. Family photographs now lined the hallway, including, I noticed with surprise, several that included me from our childhood years. I followed the sounds of activity to the kitchen, where Vanessa was arranging a salad while Zoe set the table in the adjacent dining room. Not the formal dining room where our confrontation had taken place, but the cozier breakfast room where our family had taken most meals when I was growing up. Sarah, Vanessa looked up, seeming genuinely pleased to see me. Thank you for coming. Thanks for inviting me, I replied, holding up the bottle of wine I'd brought. I wasn't sure what we were having, but I thought this might pair well. Perfect, she said, taking the bottle. We're having lasagna. Your recipe, actually, Zoe insisted. Apparently, you made it for her last month, and she's been raving about it ever since. Grandma Rose's recipe, I clarified. She taught me to make it when I was about Zoe's age. A shadow of regret flickered across Vanessa's face. I never learned. I was always too busy with other things. It's never too late to learn, I offered, surprised by my own olive branch. The dinner that followed was nothing like the tension-filled family meals I remembered from the years after Grandma's death. Aiden, who had followed his father's lead in dismissing me before, now engaged me in genuine conversation about my graduate school applications. Zoe enthusiastically explained her college plans, and Vanessa, most surprisingly of all, seemed to have shed much of her former rigidity and status consciousness. As we finished dessert, a homemade apple pie that Zoe proudly announced she'd baked herself, Vanessa cleared her throat. "Sarah, there's something I'd like to talk to you about, if you have a few minutes after dinner." I nodded, curious but no longer apprehensive about my sister's intentions as I would have been 6 months ago. After the kids excused themselves, Aiden to finish homework, Zoe to call a friend about her college news, Vanessa led me to a part of the house I hadn't expected, Grandma Rose's study, a room that had previously been converted to Brandon's home office. To my astonishment, the room had been restored to almost exactly how I remembered it from our grandmother's time. The antique desk where she wrote her gardening journals, the comfortable reading chair by the window, the walls lined with botanical books and family photographs. "You restored it," I said, unable to keep the wonder from my voice. Vanessa nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. After everything happened, I started thinking about what this house really means. Not as a status symbol or an investment, but as our family home. Our heritage. She ran her hand along the desk's polished surface. I found Grandma's journals in the attic where Brandon had stored them. Her notes about the house, about the gardens, about us. This last part was said so softly I almost missed it. "About us?" I prompted. Vanessa opened one of the desk drawers and withdrew a leather-bound journal. This was her last one. She wrote in it during the final year of her life. She handed it to me with a strange reluctance. "I think you should read it." I took the journal, feeling the worn leather beneath my fingers. "Why haven't you shown me this before?" "Because I was ashamed," Vanessa admitted, looking away. "Read the entry from March 15th, about 3 months before she died." I carefully opened the journal to the date she'd specified and began to read. Our grandmother's flowing script, March 15th. Vanessa visited today, full of plans for redecorating the East Wing. I haven't the heart to tell her that the house will never be hers alone to renovate as she wishes. Sarah loves this old place just as much, though differently. She sees its soul, not just its potential value or social standing. I've decided to leave it to both my girls equally. Vanessa will be upset, expecting it to come to her as the eldest, but I believe this is the only fair path. Perhaps joint ownership will help bridge the growing gap I see between my granddaughters. Sarah's quiet strength and Vanessa's ambitious drive could complement each other beautifully, if only they would remember the bond they once shared. I looked, up from the journal, stunned. She knew we were growing apart. Vanessa nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Keep reading." I turned the page to find the next entry. March 20th. Sarah spent the afternoon with me in the greenhouse. Such patience she has with the heritage roses, such attention to detail. She asked thoughtful questions about the family history of each variety, recording the stories in her own little notebook. So different from Vanessa, who sees the greenhouse as outdated, the gardens as inefficient use of valuable land. I worry about what will happen to my life's work when I'm gone. I've included specific provisions about the greenhouse and gardens in my will, but legal protection isn't the same as loving stewardship. Perhaps I should speak to Sarah about continuing this work, though I worry such a request might increase the tension between my granddaughters. For now, I will simply treasure these afternoons, teaching her everything I can while time remains. A lump formed in my throat as I read our grandmother's private thoughts, her concerns, her observations, her hopes for her legacy, and for us. There's one more, Vanessa said quietly. The last entry she wrote before her stroke. I turned to the final filled page of the journal. April 2nd. Had a difficult conversation with Vanessa today about her plans for after I'm gone, as she put it. She spoke of modernizing the house, making it worthy of the Wellington name she's so proud to have married into. When I mentioned that Sarah would have equal say in such decisions, she became quite upset. Sarah doesn't understand value or social position, she argued. She'd let this place remain a relic rather than realizing its potential. Perhaps she's right, in a way. Sarah does see value differently, in preservation, in history, in continuity. While Vanessa sees only the future, Sarah honors the past, while standing firmly in the present. My greatest hope is that they will find balance together, each bringing their strengths to preserve what matters while allowing necessary change. My time grows short. I feel it in my bones. I can only hope that by giving them joint stewardship of this house, I am not creating conflict, but rather opportunity for reconciliation and mutual respect. I closed the journal gently, overwhelmed by the insight our grandmother had possessed. How clearly she had seen both Vanessa and me, with all our strengths and limitations. She knew, I said softly. She knew exactly what would happen. No, Vanessa contradicted me, her voice thick with emotion. She hoped for better from us, from me. She hoped I would honor her wishes and work with you as an equal partner. Instead, She couldn't finish the sentence. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Vanessa took a deep breath. Because I want to try again. Not with the inheritance, that's settled, and rightly so. But with us, with this house, with Grandma's legacy. She gestured around the restored study. I've been working with a historical preservation society to have the house and gardens designated as landmarks. It would permanently protect the greenhouse and gardens, beyond even the conservation easement you arranged. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely moved by this unexpected development. There's more, Vanessa continued. I'm establishing a small foundation to maintain the Heritage Rose Collection and make it accessible to horticulture students and researchers. Zoe's going to help design the educational programming, and I was hoping you might consider being involved as well. Your expertise with the roses is something I could never match. The magnitude of what she was proposing, not just preservation but active promotion of our grandmother's legacy, stunned me. This wasn't the Vanessa I had known for the past several years. This was someone reconnecting with values I had thought she'd abandoned completely. What about Brandon? I asked. Last I heard, he still wanted to modernize everything. Brandon and I have different visions for the future, Vanessa said carefully. Whether or not we reconcile, I've made it clear that this house and its history are non-negotiable. It took losing your respect, and nearly losing Zoe's, for me to realize what really matters. She looked around the room, a new resolve in her expression. This isn't about money or status anymore. It's about honoring who we are and where we came from, something I forgot for too long. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the sister I had grown up with, before social climbing and status anxiety had created a gulf between us. The sister who had once helped me rescue a fallen robin's nest, who had cried with me when our parents died, who had shared midnight confidences in our childhood bedroom. I'd be honored to help with the foundation, I said, making my decision. Grandma Rose would have loved knowing her collection will continue to educate and inspire others. Relief washed over Vanessa's face. Thank you. I know I haven't earned your trust back yet, but I'm trying to make amends the best way I know how. As I drove home that evening, the leather-bound journal carefully placed on the passenger seat beside me, I reflected on the unexpected turn my life had taken in the 6 months since that confrontational family dinner. From standing up for myself after years of acquiescence, to creating a new home filled with purpose and passion, to this tentative reconciliation with my sister. Each step had built upon the last, creating a path forward I could never have imagined. The small cottage welcomed me home, its lights warm against the autumn darkness. Inside, my graduate school applications sat ready for mailing, my teaching materials for Monday's classes were prepared, and the greenhouse waited with its precious cargo of family history encoded in every carefully tended plant. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into my reading chair, opening Grandma Rose's journal once more to read her final entries more carefully. Her voice seemed to rise from the pages, wise and perceptive, seeing both Vanessa and me with such clarity and love. "We're trying, Grandma," I whispered to the quiet room. "We're finally trying to become the stewards you hoped we would be." Outside my window, the garden lay in peaceful darkness, waiting for spring's renewal. Inside, I felt my own renewal taking shape. Not a rejection of the past, but a more balanced integration of where I'd been and where I was going. The inheritance that had caused so much conflict had ultimately led to something more valuable than money or property. It had forced a reckoning that allowed authentic growth and the possibility of healed relationships. The eviction notice that had sat in my drawer for months before I found the courage to deliver it had been not just an assertion of my legal rights, but a reclamation of my self-worth and dignity. As I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I thought about what I would tell my middle school students tomorrow when they inevitably asked about my weekend. I would tell them that sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important breakthroughs. That standing up for yourself doesn't mean giving up on relationships that matter. That it's never too late to rebuild what seems broken beyond repair. And perhaps most importantly, that the most valuable inheritances aren't measured in dollars or deeds, but in the values, skills, and connections that sustain us through life's most challenging moments. Grandma Rose had known that all along. And finally, so did I. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.